The Boys, an irreverent franchise that takes the idea of superheroes, these idealistic Ubermensch, and contemplates what if they were as infallible and corruptible as the rest of us, all bundled up in a political and ethical message around capitalism and the industrial military complex of the USA.
It's the most important event in our nation's history. Learn how a kind doctor founded Vought American to make the world a safer and healthier place.
It was also a comic book series first, years before the show, that managed to garner it a whole lot more mainstream success, and a big part of that is probably the fact that the show, while still gruesome and aggressive and overt, tones down some of the more unnecessary things that the comics left in. You might be thinking, holy hell, what do you mean toned down? The show has people dying horrible deaths all the time and sex scenes involving powers that might make you uncomfortable, but are presumably somebody's fetish, and, well, I actually can't get too much into what the comics did that made them worse, because if I do say that, YouTube will take a lot of issue with this video, but let's just say that Garth Ennis is an edgy man who likes the notion of heroes being down in the dirt and grime rather than the more clean presentation that Marvel and DC had been doing until the grunge era of the 90s hit them as well, who also worked on The Punisher and Preacher, so Garth really did have a type of hero. None of that is to say that the comics are super bad. In fact, I think that they have some good narratives mixed in with so much casual misogyny and homophobia and transphobia that makes it somewhat hard to just pass off as satirical rather than presenting a gritty version of just how the world is. I mean, a fantastic character portrayal for that comparison would be just look up the version of Mother's Milk from the show and the version from the comic books, and see how much more stereotypical, caricature-laden, and just straight weird as shit one of those is with the narratives.
He's feeding you this insane fairy tale and you're too fucking stupid and brainwashed to fucking see.
However, we're not here today to talk about The Boys overall as a franchise. Instead, we're here to talk about two things. The first is a character from the Gen V spin-off series, set at the Godolkin University, which is basically a superhero school, and which features a character called Jordan Lee, who has a pretty interesting power for those interested in transgender identity and representation. The second is the trans woman Big Bobby from the 13th volume of The Boys titled Dear Becky, the final chapter in the story of The Boys, and one set after everything goes down, which serves to give us the conclusion on Huey and Starlight's story. Don't worry, there will not be spoilers for the show from us discussing those comics, as they both veer in wildly different directions. Both of these are also very recent trans representation, as Gen V came out last year in 2023, and Dear Becky was published in 2020. So the difference we're seeing is mostly between Eric Kripke with Amazon advisement on it versus the only Garth Ennis and Russ Braun version of The Boys. So to start us off, let's talk about the one that most people actually probably know, the Gen V show character of Jordan Lee. Notice how the name of the character is something that could be both either a boy or a girl's name. It's sort of gender neutral in its application.
TA.
Jordan!
What the fuck?
Well, that is actually relevant, as we discover from Jordan's time on Gen V that they have technically 3 whole power sets. The first major one being that they are bi-gender and present as either male or female, depending on circumstances, and that they present as whatever they are when they occupy that gendered form. Each gender also gets its own powers, the male form having invulnerability, and the female form having the ability to do energy blasts and also be more agile. In both forms though, they are still Jordan. That is a very important piece of information to take into this as we discuss the character. They're not changing who they are, they're merely changing the gender people perceive them as, and how they refer to themselves. They also use all pronouns definitively, and are bisexual in both forms, dating and sleeping with whoever the fuck they want to. All of this despite their parents' disapproval about their bigender nature. Those parents wanting their child to only appear as a son and just be male. We see all of this epitomised in episode 3 #ThinkBrink, when Jordan is having sex with a guy named Tyler in their female form, before getting a surprise visit from their parents, clearly not being comfortable with the bigender identity of their child.
Your favorite parent.
He thought you were such an upstanding young man.
All of that continues later on during a discussion between the parents and Jordan, when Jordan shifts to the female form and gets into an argument with their father over how he perceives them and how Jordan views themselves, and their abilities as just all part of who they are. We also see much later on, as Jordan kisses Marie, another character from Gen V, in the male form before waking up next to Marie in the bed in the female form. It really iterates the fact that this bigender nature is just something for Jordan that they've incorporated into who they are. But we do also get that even with the fact that Jordan is cool with it, that they still expect others to be not cool with it. Heavily illustrated by a scene in episode 5's Welcome to the Monster Club, where Jordan does the initial jump of assuming that Marie is rejecting them and isn't actually interested, shutting it down despite the fact that Marie clearly doesn't seem to actually be thinking that or happy with their decision.
And we weren't acting like ourselves.
But
It's all good. It's cool. We're cool.
We also learn from Jordan that they made themselves a guy during the time with Marie at first when they were kissing, because when they had their first girlfriend, they wanted them to always be a guy. So they just assumed that the straight thing was the way to go, kind of implying that to some degree they're changing who they are to better suit what they think the other person wants of them based on norms. Having a conversation with this person called Maverick, who tells them that they need to go and discuss this with Marie, because it sounds like the hang-up is on Jordan's end, not Marie's.
she just seemed so fucking freaked out when she woke up with me looking like this.
Also, Maverick tells us that gender is just a construct, a good sentiment, only slightly ruined by it being preceded by this statement.
Like, sometimes I hide in the women's showers and watch girls jerk off, and sometimes I hide in the men's. And gender's just a construct.
Regardless, that's pretty much all that we massively get from the show. I mean, there are many more little scenes featuring people referring to Jordan in awkward ways, clearly not being sure if they should call them a him or a her or a boyfriend or a girlfriend, because I mean, cis people, am I right?
Is to pick a fit, and then to hear about your new boyfriend, girlfriend, then friend.
But I think you get the general idea of what we're working with here. So, with all of that noted, what's the takeaway? What's our big conclusion on Gen V and how it handled the character of Jordan Lee? Well, the big thing is that Jordan Lee is not given to us via a trans episode. There is no explicit big one where they just lay everything down and then that's it. Jordan is a main character, and who they are and their backstory and how people react to them is drip-fed to us slowly via other narratives that incorporate it. And while neither option is definitively superior, I really like that version. It just makes it a part of their character rather than the whole of their character, and it allows us to see it in comparison to other identities that exist as well. While it might be easy for some to dismiss the bigender element because Jordan literally has a superpower that allows them to jump between two gender in a very physically represented ways, I think that it is a disservice to the fact that there is a mental/emotional aspect here that is well done and aligns better with the transgender umbrella despite the superhero context of it all. Jordan does mentally identify as bigender, does not favour either one side of who they are as the true version of themselves, no matter how much they might get harangued by their parents or align it with what they presume a partner is looking for. In fact, in that forced attempt to fit into a mould and how it doesn't feel good to them to do that, we see an aspect of transgender identity that not many other shows have bothered trying to represent. That idea that for bigender or gender fluid or agender or even all queer people, that sometimes they do feel like they have to match their presentation to what people expect. They do feel required to have to settle into something that they might not personally actually be feeling just to get by. Jordan is most free when they are able to flip between their forms at will, when they can present themselves physically as they want to mentally at that time. And that is an experience that I think speaks well to expanding a cisgender audience's concept of gender, of broadening their mind with these characters about people in the trans community.
Was my first girlfriend in the 6th grade. She always wanted me to just be a guy, so I changed for her.
All of which brings us to our second entry, stepping into the world of Garth Ennis, specifically in Dear Becky. Big Bobby comes to us hard and fast with the trans stuff in the very first issue in the series, as we see her interacting with our main character of Huey in a pub somewhere in presumably Scotland. Now, I'm not obviously Scottish, but I am trans, while Garth Ennis is also not Scottish, but certainly not trans too. So while I can't comment on the way that this comic showcases Scottish people to be in the year of our Lord 2020, I can certainly say that it's a bit weird with how he writes his trans characters. Don't get me wrong, there is some fun humanization elements here, some little bits that are kinda nice, such as Bobby riling up Huey over him dead-naming her, claiming that the Bobby he said sounds a lot like it's the Bobby with a Y, a fun little bit of jibing between friends that illustrates how well they know each other, as well as making it clear that Bobby is okay with playing on that stuff. Also, it uses the words dead-naming and cisgender, which at least showcases that Garth Ennis has read a Wikipedia article with a degree of literacy and at least semi-knows what those things mean. Unfortunately, we do see a little bit of the old Garth Ennis, the funky, edgy one, where the bartender character just reams out Huey and drops the tranny word like it ain't nothing, to the smug ignorance of Huey on the term. Look, the comic isn't saying that using the tranny word is fine, but the fact that it isn't getting challenged here is kind of a problem in a more general sense. Like, yeah, it's up to the trans person in question to decide how they want to be dealt with, and maybe Bobby gets that this village she is in is maybe a bit backwards around language, but also, if someone drops the tranny word on a friend of mine or myself, and there's clearly not a jovial sense of term reclamation around it, the best that can come from that for the person is an earful. The worst is getting their fucking ass kicked, especially depending on the friends in question. You use a slur word, you better be ready to spend the rest of the night with a busted lip is all I'm saying. Anyways, this little pub conversation continues onwards, with Garth interjecting some of his down-to-earth, common man takes on the whole wokeness brigade and everything, which is about as well handled as you might expect from a cis-straight white guy who is pretty sure he's cool with black people and gay people, but doesn't question the whole idea much further than that. And we also see that Bobby approaches their transgender identity with maybe not so exact a trans woman stereotype as other shows would perceive, joking about being both a bridesmaid and a best man in a manner that is going to get more confusing down the line when we discover some more stuff about Bobby, and really buys into that whole you can see this wasn't created by a trans person or a person with ins on the community. Saying that, we next get our Bobby fix in issue 5, when she's hanging out with Huey and Annie, the person who was Starlight before she quit the superhero business, and this is more just kinda nice hanging out with people who are accepting of who Bobby is, where she can make comments and jokes about her being a lady and a woman, and it's taken in some degree of stride. I mean, it's nice to see a trans woman who is not only a buff mummy build, but also is allowed to be comedic rather than sad. I know that we can say, oh well, she just sort of looks like a caricature of a trans woman, being very masked but dolled up in woman's clothing and makeup, and the jokes she makes about her identity aren't jokes, they're how some people really think about trans women. And like, yeah, you aren't wrong. But I always think that we're working with such a rock bottom for transgender representation in these kinds of media and from people out of the community that I will take mildly harmful if perceived a certain way but kind over actively shitty. The bar of expectation is at rock bottom, and so anything above that is good. Anyways, it's nice that we get to see a little bit of political mess here from Bobby, as she discusses the fact that due to her needing estrogen and spironolactone as a trans woman, things are going to get harder with the Brexit decision impacting the importation of those items. That they might be getting a lot more expensive, and it's hard to do less legal ways of obtaining them thanks to there being health risks like blood clots from bad stuff. All of which is really great actually that it gets included. It's really fantastic that Garth Ennis managed to cover a very real issue that impacts the trans community from this more broad political decision. Something that people might not be aware of, and the risks that go with it. We then get it a little weirdly spoiled by the revelation that Huey still feels bad for Bobby in this, partly because he feels like he caused her becoming a trans woman, due to the fact that in a spin-off series named The Boys Highland Laddie, she follows him into a big fight that ends with her getting her dick cut off, and following that, she decides to transition. I mean, in these panels, she makes it clear that doing so is something that she wanted to actually do independent of that fact, but also just weird thing to put out there. Just strange that the inciting incident for this person to come out as trans was literally having their dick chopped off. It's the kind of storyline that mirrors less than savoury perspectives on trans people, and how they come to terms with their identity. Our final scene with Bobby is at the end of the Dear Becky arc, where she is there at the wedding between Annie and Huey in a fantastic fucking dress and hat. Like, no shit, absolute queen outfit. And also, zoom, enhance, contrast. I said muscle mummy earlier, and I guess I should be saying muscle dom buff mummy, because that feels really Lady Dimitrescu coded. Play the clip.
She's a hot, tall, busty, thick MILF with killer nails.
But yeah, we get a little bit of the same here. It's been great that the character is here, getting included, getting to present as they do, but also they then refer to themselves as both male and female in response to Huey saying something about how men are no good without women, which adds to that whole confusion bubble of the fact that everything I could find about Bobby refers to her as a trans woman, nothing else, and yet she refers to herself in ways that, while they could be something that trans women do refer to themselves as, I mean, I have heard it happen, especially from older trans folk, that they still consider trans women to be men in some way, it is soured by remembering that the person who wrote this isn't trans, and doesn't have that input, right? Like, this isn't a case of the character choosing to do this. They're just a puppet being pushed around by the creator, who is the one we really have to look at as saying all these words and writing all these things. I'm saying I would be having a different attitude towards this if a trans woman had wrote this comic rather than a cis man. And that's just how it is. So anyways, that's that. And I think you can sort of see the difference in representation and sort of get what my conclusions here are gonna be. They're both doing different things and approaching different parts of the community. But while the Garth Ennis version reminds me quite strongly of like the nicer trans episodes of shows back in the 90s and 2000s, shit like 2.5 Men or The Oblongs.
But the money you've spent here has paid for the first half of a very expensive operation.
What operation?
Sorry, boundary.
The Gen V trans character is actively pushing boundaries in representation that those shows absolutely would not have touched on or even had the knowledge to go into. I mean, if anything, the Gen V thing seems like a step up story-wise and is an interpretation of a somewhat similar Misfits arc that I will be covering at some point, don't you worry. If you haven't seen Misfits, it's another really amazing grounded superhero series, but set in urban England, with a main cast who are all minor criminals / delinquents. It's really fucking good and well worth a watch, especially as it has a pretty interesting gender swap narrative.
What are you doing?
I'm running again.
Like this?
So that's the Boys franchise, at least for now, as of course there is a new season dropping very soon, and they very well could introduce an interpretation of the Bobby character into the show like they have with most other things. Like, did you know that in the comics, Newman was actually a parody of Bush? A big old stupid dunce of a man who was seen as the perfect puppet for corporate America? Yeah, they changed things pretty drastically. So here is hoping that Bobby does make it into The Boys in some form as trans representation for the main series. If she does, or if another trans character does, then you can bet your ass I will make a sequel to this video. But consider this as a primer for all of you who are interested in what trans stuff is already included in the series. If you liked what I said, or how I said it, or found me to be functional background noise on the second monitor while you do some shit, then that's great, and about all I can hope to be. Consider liking, sharing, subscribing, commenting, or checking out some of my other videos on various topics. There's enough stuff in there for you to definitely finish that project you're working on while listening to my voice drone on about trans reppin' Friends, or My Little Pony, or talk about the Twilight universe for 4 hours. If you really like what I've done and want to support my channel, the best way to do that is through Patreon if you want to subscribe, or Ko-Fi if you want to do a single one-off donation. The links for both of those should be in the description below, and the names of those in the 5 and up category should be on the screen right now. I really appreciate everyone on there for helping me to make this channel something that I can do, especially as I try to move to doing only a video every couple of weeks, so I can focus more attention on actually making those massive, multi-hour brief look videos. The next one is on the captivating madness of Riverdale, and I've already almost got through all of season 1 in only 8,000 words. 6 more seasons to go! But yeah, to do that I need a good economic base that makes me feel like I don't have to pump videos out to be able to afford rent, food, power, internet, and cat. So having Patreon really does give me that security. I am literally saying that without those people on there, this channel would not be able to function like it does. And if you want to be part of helping it to keep going, then consider joining it. Other than all of that, thank you for watching the video, and I hope you have a great day.